Welcome to the Post Shift Podcast, your raw look at the hospitality industry, brought to you by SHC. What has happened in Post Shifters? Welcome back to another episode of the Post Shift Podcast. Of course, I'm your host, Shawn Soole. Today is actually an interesting episode because it's an episode from Modern Bar Cart. I got interviewed by Erik from Modern Bar Cart, and I don't usually get interviewed. It's usually me doing the interviewing. So this is a nice change of pace. This really gets down to how much I love my city, my thought process behind the Great Northern Cocktails, sort of the future of everything. And yeah, it really gets down to why I do what I do. And so I really enjoyed this episode. I could have really talked to Erik about entrepreneurship and business and everything else for hours and hours and hours. I hope you really enjoy this episode. All the links to Modern Bar Cart will be in the description, so I hope you enjoy it. Thanks always for the support, and I'll see you soon. Bye.
Shawn, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
Can you, well, I guess, let me back up and say, normally what we do is we start this podcast by having people introduce themselves, but I kind of want to intentionally bury the lead here because you have a great story that seems to be situated in a very special place. So how about we start with you describing Victoria, British Columbia, and the cocktail scene there, and maybe how you came to be a part of it.
So I came to Canada from Australia. Obviously, you can tell I haven't got a Canadian accent. I came to Canada in 2006. And Victoria is a very, very small city. We're the capital of British Columbia, but there's only about 365,000 people in the city, and that's spread over a substantial area, which we can get into Singapore later because I was in Singapore last year, and Singapore fits into what we class as our city 7 times. So it's a really spread out area with a small amount of people. About 100,000 people live downtown, which is really nothing. So I got here in 2006, and in about 2009-10, cocktail culture started like clicking a little bit, and I took over a little cocktail bar in a hotel called Clive's Classic Lounge, and from there we sort of grew. I had people start opening up other cocktail bars, and we sort of partnered up, and we have a really great culture here. It's a very much like a very big family. And so it sort of just spread organically to 3 or 4 bars, and then it became 5, it became 6, it became 7. And so the great thing was that everybody just works with each other. So splitting cases of alcohol from the liquor stores and all that sort of stuff. No one ever saw anybody as a competitor. Everybody just was like, we're going for a cocktail culture that is all inclusive. And so even though we have a small city and a small town, we've done pretty well to put ourselves on the map in Canada and worldwide.
And, ostensibly, you're also a cocktail author. We'll be speaking about your latest book here in a few minutes, but it's funny reading the forewords to your book. You managed to get some pretty impressive people, Jeffrey Morgenthaler, Philip Duff, to kind of comment on the scene there. So, I'd love to speak a little bit more about Victoria, BC as like this little city with a disproportionate gravitational pull on the cocktail space.
We've been pretty lucky. When I was at Clive's Classic Lounge, this is like 2009, like really was the start of like Facebook for real. Like Facebook been around for 3 or 4 years, but like really, really peaked in that sort of time frame. So there was a lot of times that I would ask people cold call them if they'd come up and do seminars. I've been lucky enough at Clive's to host Philip a couple of times, Jeffrey a couple of times, Jacob Briers, Angus Winchester, a whole bunch of people. Like Angus Winchester came up purely on a bluff. He had 5 days downtime in Seattle, and he messages me and like, I got 5 days in Seattle downtown time. Do you want me to pop over? And we're so close, he just jumped on a little seaplane and away we went. And then in 2011, 2012, Clive's actually got nominated in the top 4 best hotel bars in the world at Tales. And so it's the only Canadian bar ever to hit a top 4 position in any category at Tales. And so that sort of helped us build. But we just did some fun things there, lots of seminars. We did seminars for general public and the industry. I think the biggest one looking back was probably our Homage Cocktail Fridays. So Homage Cocktail Friday, every Friday. Now, when I took over Clive's, it was a very small hotel bar, just been renovated, and it went from like a British pub to this high-end European lounge. And so there was a whole period of probably 18 months where on Saturday night I was ringing out $120 by myself, not in tips, like $120 in sales, and I'd had like 4 customers. And so we started thinking of these interesting ways to grab people and to educate people, and general public education was just as important as industry education. And so we sort of did this Homage Cocktail Friday where we took a cocktail menu from a very famous bar somewhere else in the world and did it. We did that for, I think we did something close to 85, 90 Homage Cocktail Fridays, which is a lot of bars, and doing it every single Friday, like you're in the business, so you know what sort of time frames bartenders have. That when you say I need it right away means like 2.5 weeks for most bartenders. And so that was the big thing, is that we started doing these special menus, and people came in to try cocktails from Germany, from the UK, from Australia, from New Zealand. And that sort of gained notoriety because all of a sudden you have a bartender in Barcelona who's getting hit up by a little cocktail bar in Victoria, BC. And so it built like that. And so I'm lucky enough that I've traveled and done some events with Philip. Philip and I are very good friends. And so am I with Jeffrey. And the fortunate thing is I'm just allowed to hit him up and go, hey, you want to write the foreword to my book? And they're like, yeah, of course, buddy, no problems at all.
Right. Yeah. Wow. A couple things I want to dig into here. One, obviously, for folks listening who are not in the industry, a 1-week turnaround to learn an entire cocktail menu and then execute said menu with any sort of semblance of effectiveness is a tall order for any bar team out there. And especially to have the ambitious task of then needing to completely bleach your brain of last week's menu and now reabsorb a completely new menu. That's not something that you really see too many places. And on top of that, it seems like this project, right? This little convention that you set for yourself where you say, okay, we're going to take a menu from somewhere else and we're going to spit it out here. It seems like that also was a great way for you to gain connections in a way that wasn't phony, that wasn't like, rubbing elbows at an official function, right? So, that must have been just a tremendous task for you and your team. How did you pull it off?
There was a time where I still do, but there's a time where I was working 100 hours a week, 6.5 days a week. But we didn't really have a choice. Like, I didn't have a stake in the game when it came to ownership or anything of Clive's, but I saw, coming from Australia, we have a great cocktail culture in Australia, and I was lucky enough to come up through the ranks in Australia. But when I got to Canada, it wasn't until 2009, 2010 that most of Canada didn't have a good cocktail bar. And so for me, I had a three-year buffer there that I worked at a different restaurant as the assistant general manager at a little franchise place. But when I took over in 2009, I was like, it was that upward swing of North America's cocktail culture sort of building and growing. And I was like, I really want to do this. And there was a couple other cocktail bars opening up in Victoria. And I was like, I really want to make sure that we're the best, we're the hub of the cocktail scene in Victoria to sort of create and continue to build this. And so for me, it was, I didn't have a choice in the matter per se. It had to be done. And that sounds very martyrish, but it's one of those things is like, I always look at, do you want to work really hard for 6 to 12 months and achieve your goal? Or do you want to work like 40 hours a week and take 2.5, 3 years to achieve it? So I saw the opportunity in Victoria. The consumer was ready and willing for it. And so we just doubled down on everything.
Yeah, and that completely makes sense to me, right? You're talking about doubling down, and I think, the way you're speaking right now, it kind of almost seems like an investor, right? Talking about money, but what you're talking about is time and energy. And it seemed like with the advent of Facebook and with the surge of cocktail culture in North America, you hit everything at the right time, so it made sense to do that doubling down on. Obviously, it turned out wonderfully. So let's transition now to talk a little bit about your first book, and then maybe the way that you kind of grew your influence beyond BC to meet the Jeffrey Morgenthalers and the Philip Duffs of the world.
So The first cocktail book, Cocktail Culture, I was written up in a BC tourism magazine, and the publisher saw it, and they hit me up on Facebook actually and was like, "Hey, we'd love to chat to you about doing a cocktail book for Victoria." And at the time, again, like Victoria, this was 2011, 2012. We were starting to get the upward slide, but we're still a small city now, 10 years later. But they're like, "We really like to chat to you about doing this cocktail book all about Victoria." And I'm like, "Okay, cool." And we sort of went on the process of finding all the bartenders doing something special. Again, like I said, we're a very family orientated sort of culture and industry here. So everybody was going to get involved regardless. And we sort of built that out. The real twist was we did a cocktail festival here in Victoria called Art of the Cocktail, and it's still around. But in 2010, 2011 was when it sort of really kicked off. And that's when I started leveraging my network from Tales and from events and stuff like that to get these people up here. So we've had David Wondridge come to Victoria. We've had a whole load. I think Philip's come back almost every single year while I was organizing that festival.
He really loves Canada. But he really does. He really does love
Canada. So mine and Phil's relationship is an interesting one. When Javine Gin first launched in Canada, Victoria was one of the first places that launched. And I remember talking to the rep, and this is always a great story because Philip always underestimates how much work he gave me that day. But I talked to the rep and was like, "So what do you want to taste?" He's like, "I'll taste all the individual botanicals and we'll taste the gins and we'll go from there." I'm like, "Cool, that's 25 people for industry, 25 people for general public. That's 8 glasses per." I'm like, "Cool." And at 10:30, we sat down and had coffee with Philip. He just got into town and he's like, "Okay, so I want to do 5 cocktails during this session as well." I'm like, "Excuse me, what?" And so I had to try and track down 125 pieces of glassware for the session in 2 hours, plus ingredients to batch, and then flip it all and do a general public that night. And it was like a 16-hour day. And the hard thing was I had everything set up, ready to go. I got in early. I set it all up, ready to rock and roll. And then he just drops this bomb on me. So, but then at the end of it, he sits me down and is like, "Listen, I really appreciate all the work you did today. Do you want to come to France with me?" And I'm 29, 30 years old right there. And he's like, "Do you want to come to France with me and run the GCP, the Javine Connoisseurs program in Cognac? 40 bartenders from around the world, world-class Diageo style event. You'll be hanging out with Gary Reagan and this person. I'm like, "Yeah, sure." And so he flew me with Javine to Cognac, and we hung out for 4 or 5 days there. And then London Bar Week was just after that. So we went to London, and we went to Amsterdam to his house and Rotterdam and all these different places. And we did this like 11-day tour together, 5 countries and multiple cities. And that's how my relationship with Philip grew. But that's probably the funniest story. And then Jeffrey and I, in 2009 or 10, we actually got selected to go to the BNIC Cognac Summit. And it's a big Cognac Summit in Cognac. And it's a training program now, which I'm actually supposed to be at right now if it wasn't for COVID. But we're both sitting there, and this is before Jeffrey was Jeffrey. It was that time when his blog was still kicking off, and we're sitting in Amsterdam. We land in Amsterdam, and we're sitting there having a beer and a coffee. So it's like a Heineken and an espresso because we're just exhausted. We're sipping, and we're both sitting there. And I was like, "Do you feel like a fraud?" And he's like, "Yes, I feel like a fraud. Like, why did they invite us on this thing?" And so that's how our relation. And we spent a week in France on probably one of the most amazing trips I've ever been on. So Salvatore Calabrese, Peter Dorelli, Francesca Lafroni, Doug Frost, Erik Alperin, Alex Cretina, like the list, Julie Reiner, Sasha Petresky, and we're all just hanging out in Cognac for a week. And so that sort of clincher there, those 2 years, that year and a half, really took my personal career, but also my attachment to Clive's to a completely different level.
Right. And, it's something I've struggled with too. I've mentioned this maybe in the past, but I personally feel like a very poorly connected person. And the podcast has obviously been a great way to just, reach out and meet people and get connected. But yeah, it's crazy once you start getting, with the right people, with people who you not only respect, but people who have this, almost like a kinetic energy about them. People who are willing to take that input of like, hey, I need 125 more glasses, and we need those in a couple hours. You can do that, right? So if you can say yes to that type of energy, it's crazy how you can find yourself in situations where you're sitting next to people that you just feel like a fraud with. I felt the same thing when I was sitting next to Jeff Barry judging rum at the American Distilling Institute. I'm like, this guy wrote Sippin' Safari, and I'm just me, I'm a mere mortal. So I can relate. And I think it's, I think that's how you grow, is you kind of push yourself and stretch. So we're here ostensibly to talk about your book, Great Northern Cocktails. Right. So you've told us a story of Clive's. You've told us a story of how you've kind of infiltrated the industry and forged these connections with the right people. And now I think the most important question to kick us off on this path of the book is, what, if anything, characterizes a northern cocktail, right? Because we understand that tiki cocktails somehow orbit the equator. But if we're not hanging out around the equator, if we're hanging out near the, in the Great White North, what does that even mean?
Oh, that's a tough one. It's a little existential, because Great Northern Cocktails is really a collaboration and a push for the bartenders in Canada over the cocktails they create. I think showcasing the bartenders like in unison with their cocktails is an important sort of story, because I think a lot of people don't understand Canada in general. It's huge. Like, it's absolutely massive. Like, I was talking to my daughter the other day and like explaining to her that New York City has the same population as Alberta and BC combined. Like, two of our biggest provinces have 5.5 million people, and New York has 5.5 million people. So it's interesting to sort of showcase where these cocktails came from, the dynamic way these bartenders are sort of looking at it, because we are a big melting pot, because we're sort of spread out. It reminds me a lot like Australia, that we're sort of this island, even though we're attached to the US, but we're this sort of island that no one pays much mind to, but really showcases local ingredients and terroir-driven cocktails and interesting techniques that these bartenders have picked up from liquor.com and blogs and reading books and stuff like that. And then they're putting them into play in Winnipeg. So I think the definition of Great Northern Cocktails is really just showcasing what Canada has to offer and how we offer it over anything else. Right.
And, that's one style of cocktail book that is out there. It is not the kind that I think I would ever consider writing, because, man, the number of people you had to collaborate with to make this book a reality. I mean, you must have had some sort of crazy spreadsheet or some sort of crazy tracking system to get this thing across the finish line, right? And combine that with the fact that, as you mentioned earlier, that, bartenders are sometimes a little bit wishy-washy on deadlines, right? So this must have been a huge feat to source all of these recipes from the various provinces of Canada. So, like, what was that process like for you?
A tedious one. Some bartenders got back to me straight away. Ones that have really got a good personal brand and reputation, they sort of like bang straight away. That filled out about 50% of the book. And then it started becoming a email, Facebook, Instagram message like every couple of weeks. And then as we got closer to the deadline, it was like, okay, so this is every couple of days. Like, hey, I still need this, or I still need that. I don't think I dropped any. If I did, it might be one or two bartenders that just never responded to anything that I sent. But I'm hoping that this book will continue to sort of evolve and continue. Like, I don't see it as a one-time publish. I think it's something that will update every 2 years, which will. I'm not sure why I would put that myself through that continuously for the next decade. But I think for me, it does go back to that. It's not really a book that I would normally write, but it has the same sort of feeling behind it as cocktail culture did, that it was showcasing bartenders that people may not know or understand or see. And it's not necessarily about the venue per se. It's really about the city they exist in and the people that make that city so vibrant, because we are so spread out. Like Edmonton and Calgary, a couple of hours apart, but they're really vibrant, cool cocktail cities. You got Saskatoon in the middle of nowhere on the prairie. Same thing with Winnipeg to a degree. Halifax is just killing it right now. Like Halifax, I find is like the mirror image of Vancouver Island and Victoria. So there's just so many people out there, and I think that I probably missed. The next issue, I'm probably looking at adding maybe 50 to 75 new bartenders in the next issue. But really it comes down to that bartender's story, where they came from and how that influences their cocktail that goes in the book.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And, one thing that strikes me, obviously there's one very distinct similarity between Australia and Canada. Obviously, they are both former British kind of controlled countries, and as such, I think that they were primed very early on in their histories to be sort of melting pots in slightly different ways between Australia and Canada. But I think, I definitely agree with the diversity aspect. I myself, you probably don't know this, but I myself am half Quebecois. And so I spent my childhood taking road trips from Western Mass, about 10-hour road trips from Western Massachusetts up to near Quebec City, where I would stay with my great aunt and my great uncle on a lake in Quebec. And it is very different from the States. Spread out is one way to put it, but I don't think that for most people, most Americans anyway, most people don't really have a concept of how truly spread out it is. And so in that respect, having a concentrated cocktail culture in any given place is a real, not a miracle, but it's a real achievement. And so what I wanted to maybe talk about now is to allow you to kind of give me a better picture of what drinking culture in Canada or cocktail culture in Canada is actually like, because again, my experience is driving up there and stopping right on the other side of the border and picking up a case of Labatt Blue. And that was the extent of drinking culture, was Labatt. So what about maybe maybe we can talk about like the Toronto cocktail and the Bloody Caesar?
Yeah, the Caesar is always going to be one of these drinks that is epitome of Canadian culture. Unfortunately, I like a good Caesar first thing in the morning during brunch. Anytime after like 2:00 in the afternoon, on the weekends, anytime after 12 during the weekdays, I think it's inappropriate. But that's just my personal opinion on the Caesar. I think that's always going to have a solid movement. But I think in the last 10 years, with the explosion of craft beer and local wine and all these sort of things, and everything like Niagara Falls and Niagara Wine Region being so close to Toronto and Okanagan and BC, I think locality has become a big focus for a lot of bartenders, and so they're using the local spirits and wine and beer as part of their programs. And I think terroir driven, and I think it's just it's an expansion of where your farm to table food is and your restaurants like that. And I think it's just an expansion of that. And I think more and more people are willing to try new things all the time. And that mainly that's consumerism over what bartenders want to sort of push. But I think when bartenders really want to back something and push something, they tend to really force it. Like there's Compass, is it Compass? No, Collective Arts. Collective Arts in Toronto is absolutely huge. Brewery that turned into a distillery. Bartenders absolutely love Collective Arts in Toronto. They've backed it, and it's become a real bartender backed brand. And so I think when you get the bartenders hooked on something, then they're going to push it for their consumers. And then consumers start looking at different things, and they start educating themselves on craft beer and craft spirits, and it sort of explodes out from there. I think consumer education hand in hand needs to be as important as bartender education. If you put all your time and effort into bartender education, it's great. But if you train the consumer as well, everybody sort of comes up at the same level.
Mm-hmm. I couldn't agree more. That's kind of what this podcast is about. We have a pretty even split between industry professional listeners and home enthusiasts. So that's kind of exactly what we try to do here. One note on Canadian beer, and this is for folks here in the U.S. I'm a big fan of Belgians, and up in Quebec, obviously, we have Unibrew, Broue en français, spell it correctly. And for folks here in the United States, one of the things that I found maybe about a year ago, and I'm guessing it's still the case, is that Unibrew was actually the co-packer of all of the Trader Joe's Belgian style beers with the Trader Joe's kind of, generic brand on them. So if you're in a Trader Joe's, their Belgians are amazing. So pick up those because they're made by kind of the masters in Canada. So for what it's worth, Canadian beer definitely been making a comeback. How about the Toronto cocktail? I seem to remember reading something somewhere that you were responsible for, kind of a resurgence in that sphere.
That one's an interesting one because Jamie Boudreau from Cannon in Seattle, he actually is a Vancouver bartender originally, and he moved to Seattle with his wife, who's American, and he opened up Cannon, and he was a big proponent for the Toronto for many, many years. And then I did a cocktail seminar at Tails, I think 2012. Yeah, I think it was 2012, about cocktail culture Canadian cocktails not being an oxymoron, like classic Canadian cocktails, because people always think of the Caesar and that's pretty much the extent of it. But we have a Vancouver cocktail, we have a Toronto cocktail. So we started delving in, and again, 2012, we really have to remember, like, there was blogs and the internet was a good resource, but still nothing like it is now in 2020. And so my best friend who collects antique cocktail books and reproductions, he started doing, I remember very clearly, I was at Clive's working a Friday night, we're just getting stomped, and he just belts in like into the bar, like runs up to the bar and throws me a book, and it's Robert Vermeer's cocktail book from 1924, I think. 1924, Robert Vermeer's cocktail book, reproduction, and there's a cocktail in there called Fernet cocktail. And it's the exact same recipe for the Toronto cocktail, but there's a quote at the very bottom that says, "This cocktail is enjoyed by Canadians from Toronto." And so then we started researching Robert Vermeer and and where he'd come from and how he'd sort of done all this. I was at the time when we were really researching the Toronto cocktail, researching like Italian immigrants into New York, because David Embry was the first person to list it as the Toronto cocktail. So I was like, okay, well, maybe an Italian immigrant brought over, like smuggled in some Fernet Branca. And then I found out that Fernet Branca actually had a distillery in New York during that time as well. So Fernet Branca had set up a distillery. So I was like mapping immigration patterns, Italian immigration patterns into New York in the 20s and 30s, and the whole shebang. But then we found this quote, and we sort of said that Vermeer worked in a lot of resorts. His family had a resort in Belgium. And my sort of thought processes, or my hypothesis, was that a bunch of Canadians came in. He did an off-the-cuff cocktail, called it the Fernet cocktail, because Fernet Branca is a main ingredient and really the clinch pin. It's sort of like a Mare Pecan in Brooklyn's, and put that quote in his cocktail book. And I think that's sort of what it was. A touristy group from Canada sitting at the bar, makes it off the cuff, and the Toronto is born. And then slowly but surely it would have evolved, and David Embry would have picked it up and called it the Toronto. So there's a gap there between Vermeer and Embry, but I think it's a great story, and I love the fact that in 2012 we found this sort of random quote, and we took full ownership on what the Toronto cocktail was. It's the same thing. We did the Hotel Georgia cocktail from Vancouver as well, which was a big one. That was I think there was an Embry as well. That was the first mention of the dry shake. And so we did a whole bunch of these classic Canadian cocktails and sort of showcased where we'd actually come from.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you say, oh, well, there's a gap between these two authors, but like certainly the gap that you're describing historically is not the biggest gap that we experience in when trying to trace back the origins of certain cocktails. So it's like, obviously if you're talking to somebody like a David Wondrich or somebody who's done all this deep research, I feel like it probably wasn't all that hard of a sell when you were able to, kind of do your diligence on it.
Well, no, and that's the thing is David Embry was this amazing sort of accountant and lawyer and all this sort of at-home thing. So the amount of people that he would have had in his inner circle would have been extensive. And it wasn't Embry who did the Hotel Georgia. Sorry, I just clicked something else and I've forgotten the guy's name because it was a big part of that seminar. But no, 22 years back then wasn't very long at all. Like to travel all the way from Europe to New York, it wasn't very long. It's like 22 seconds as it is now.
Pretty much, yeah. Wow. So you've done a ton of work on both the classic cocktails and then also, obviously, with Great Northern Cocktails, you're highlighting, obviously, the best stuff that's going on now at bars throughout Canada. I want to get in a second to maybe just some advice you might have for anybody who's thinking about taking a trip to Canada, and maybe the best ways to seek out the best cocktail spots there. But first, I wanted to know if there were any trends or ingredients that jumped out at you when you were putting out this book, right? Because here in the United States, we have Florida. Well, we grow oranges and citrus and grapefruits in Florida, but Canada has some unique constraints in the ingredients front. So I didn't know if there were any ingredients or particular trends in cocktail styles that jumped out as you were compiling this book that you found interesting.
It's a broad spectrum because I had a young bartender from Winnipeg give me this crazy devil's breakfast, I think, or death by breakfast, and it's served in a cereal bowl with Fruit Loops and a Fruit Loop Bourgette and a few other things. And it's a small little bar called The Roost in Winnipeg. And you're just like, where did you get all this stuff? And then on the flip side, I had an award-winning bartender from Montreal who's based in London now throw me a recipe for her favorite drink, her favorite recipe for a dirty martini. And I messaged her back. I'm like, this is what you want to go with? She's like, yep, I love this drink. This is the one I want to have. And so you had this sort of weird dichotomy of super young bartenders in a really small, weird little market giving me just like ridiculously elevated, crazy high-end cocktails. And then you have award-winning bartenders in big cities going, you know what? No, I just want a Negroni variation or an old-fashioned variation or a dirty martini variation. And so it was great to sort of see the spectrum of how everybody sort of flowed. And I think Canada is really difficult because most of our liquor boards are government controlled. And so accessing a lot of things is not the easiest thing. Like we have a lot of things to to offer and to access, but to actually get them from the government liquor board can be sometimes a pain in the ass, especially if you want to do it over a multiple amount of times. You might get one case, but the second case might be difficult to get. And so I saw a trend like more local stuff, which is always a little bit more difficult when it comes to a cocktail book because it's very specific to that city, that bartender. It can't be replicated as easy as possible. Like I think I had some weird Quebec Amaros thrown in the recipes, and I'm like, I can't get those in BC. This is going to be a difficult one. It's going to be a difficult one for anybody in the US to read. But I think the great spread was it shows the individual cultures in each individual city, how they're evolving bit by bit. Like you talk about tiki, and I see cocktail culture in every city sort of has to go on a sort of an arc where you start off with the classic cocktail bars and you have a tiki bar and you have a tequila bar and you have a whiskey bar and it sort of progresses into molecular mixology and super high-end vested bow tie sort of service. And so it has this massive arc. And so each city in Canada is sort of at a different stage in this arc. And so you get this sort of trend coming out of like Halifax is very much like Victoria, as I was saying before, because we have so many local ingredients, foragers and crazy people that you might not have access to in Toronto or Montreal, where you have a dude in a coveralls show up at your restaurant door, knock on your door, and he's got a whole load of foraged ingredients. He's like, how much do you want of each? Which we have in Victoria. We have a dedicated forager for most of the restaurants here. So you gain like wild rose petals and flowering currant flowers and all this sort of stuff. And so you gain all these crazy ingredients to play with. And so you sort of see it depending on the city. Like Toronto is very cosmopolitan, same with Vancouver. So you can see those cocktails being very much more geared to the consumer that goes there. Like botanist in Vancouver, Grant Sini there did a crazy one with mushroom syrup, which wasn't the only mushroom syrup we had in the book, which was very weird. And they do a lot of very elaborate staging with dry ice and aviaries and all this sort of crazy stuff. And so, but then you have the next recipe along is basically a Brooklyn variation using a local Amer pecan. So it's night and day when it comes to the cocktail styles throughout Canada.
Yeah, that's interesting. Now this forager, this seems like a picky detail to focus on. This forager, do you have one forager for the entire city, or does each restaurant have a person who forages for these ingredients?
To be honest with you, in Victoria, we actually have one forager. He has like a little team of like 3 or 4 people, and Lance will go out and you can make a request on what you want and he'll go looking for it, or he'll just show up and it's like, listen, we've only got a week of wild rose petals right now, so we went out and just blew through as many wild rose petals we possibly could. Here's a couple of bags. And so I've had everything from like wild mint dropped off to make a mint liqueur, like a wild mint liqueur, and all these sort of things. So yeah, in Victoria, we're lucky enough we have this one crazy forager who is as a team, and he'll spread them out all over around our little rural areas and go and pick a whole bunch of stuff for restaurants and bars.
Well, next time you talk to Lance, let him know I want him on the podcast, because I can't imagine a more bizarre and interesting interview than the one guy who forages for all of Victoria's bars. I think I can make that happen. That's good. I think he should write a book too, or maybe like at least do a good Instagram account. I hope I'm going to look for him on Instagram and see if I can find his little photo accounts of his various foraging exploits. So that's fascinating. So Shawn, let's now talk a little bit about what somebody. Let's assume this traveler is from the U.S., because the majority of my listeners are in the U.S. Let's imagine somebody on the other end of this little shelter-in-place pandemic situation that we have on our hands is planning a trip to Canada. Maybe they want to hit 1 or 2 cities, and they want to make sure that they hit the best cocktail spots. How would you advise them to try and set that up?
This is always an interesting one. I could just plug the book and say, get my book and just read that. But but usually what I try and do is, obviously social media is always a great reference point. And even when I have people go, I'm going to this place, where should I go? I always only give them like 2 or 3 selections. And I say, go and sit at the bar, strike up a conversation with the bartender and ask them where they should go next. And so for me, it's always, I literally Google best cocktail bars in X city, pick out 1 good cocktail bar, 2 cocktail bars that you can sort of go and check out the vibe. Now, obviously, top of Google page is not where I usually go. I usually go towards the end of the first page, if not the second, and look for a Time Out article or a BuzzFeed article or something like that actually legitimizes the cocktail culture. And then I try and make friends with the bartenders, and I ask them where to go and I ask them who to talk to. And I also always give the bartender's name as well to people who are going on, like, go and see such and such at this bar. They'll probably be on for Friday night. Ask them. If they're not there, I'm sure the second bartender or the third bartender will tell you that where to go next, and sort of just build out your thing, because you'll always find the craziest little places that won't make those lists. And so you go to the one main places, and then you find the little crazy little places that may not have made that list that you looked up.
Sure, right.
And so that's always the way I sort of go about it. It's super rudimentary and isn't an interesting way at all. But I kind of see, if people are cocktail enthusiasts and they really want to explore cocktail culture in Canada or in a city in Canada, it's always about finding that bartender and getting that relationship with the bartender going. And then you get the best secrets. You get the place to go get hot pot at 3:00 in the morning because you've already done 4 or 5 cocktail bars. And so that's the sort of building the relationships with the bartenders are always more important than the bars themselves.
Right. And I mean, to be honest, that's how I got to know the New Orleans cocktail scene, the San Francisco cocktail scene,
Yep.
On my various trip to Tales and the ADI judging events that I've done on the West Coast. Is you just kind of, you saddle up, you mentioned, all right, well, there's probably the head bartender's probably going to be on a Friday night. But if you have a chance to go on a, maybe a Tuesday night, for example, when it's less busy, you might actually have the opportunity to have a more in-depth conversation with whichever bartender is on. So really, you can't go wrong. Whatever night you go to the bar that you pick as that one must-have experience in that city, then you can kind of expect to just be instructed on how to branch out from there, because you're right. Like, a lot of the things that you're going to see on the top of your Google search results are going to be these venues that have had time to accrue all of these ratings and hack the algorithms that allow you, or pay off whichever, Yelpers you need to get your top spots. However, like what you're mentioning is like one of the things that I think is going to be really big following this pandemic is pop-ups. Because there's going to be a lot of open space. There's going to be a lot of people who are a little bit skittish about paying rent for a concept that may not go over as well, because we don't know exactly how the public is going to respond to going out after this whole situation. So I think you're going to have a lot of pop-ups. And so as things start to open up, I think the role of the bartender in being a guide for people who are especially traveling from out of town is a completely essential one. And for the bartenders listening to this, keep your finger on the pulse as things open up. Make sure you share that with people, because that's a way that you can have, as a bartender, a disproportionate impact on the venues that you feel deserve attention as things are getting off the ground again. I think that's a really good point.
It's just a nice organic way of doing it. Like, you can plan to a certain degree, but I've gone to a lot of cities for 18 hours and had like layovers. And so I try and not plan as much as I want. I have my 2 or 3 places that, like you said, have to hit. Like Tommy's in San Francisco, you're going to make that trek out to Tommy's, even though it's nowhere near anything else. You're going to trek out to Tommy's and then trek back downtown. But then you sort of just organically spiderweb it out. And next thing you know, I've had great nights where I've met up with bartenders who are finishing up their shift, and they take me out on the town, and I go to places that I would never even thought about going to because I didn't even know they existed.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So obviously, if you are thinking about visiting the Great White North, please, obviously, purchase Shawn's book. We'll have obviously links on the show notes page, and also we'll tell you before we sign off here the best ways to find Shawn and the book in the digital space. But also just that's my approach anyway. I hate going on trips where everything is super rigid and you have to be here and here by a certain time. I just like picking a couple of highlights, and just as long as I get those highlights, everything else can kind of be, as you said, organic and kind of branch out naturally. So the last thing on the agenda that I really wanted to talk about here before the lightning round is you, like me, have a podcast. So why don't you tell our listeners about your podcast and see if we can't do a little bit of cross-pollination here?
So I've just actually on Tuesday, I've been doing the podcast for 500 days as of Tuesday, and I posted 157 episodes in 500 days. So it's an episode every 3.2 days, which I thought was quite a nice highlight. During COVID, I've been doing, I was doing a episode every single day, Monday to Friday. So 5 episodes a week, which usually came from live streams, and then that would go onto YouTube and everything else. But the Post Shift podcast is my take on like you do is like interview people, find out where they've come from. I always find the most interesting stories, even from good friends that I have hung out with on numerous occasions. And then on my Tuesday episode, so I do 2 episodes a week usually. My Friday is my interview episode, and then my Tuesday episode is usually my advice rant sort of episode. And so I sort of give some advice to young bartenders. My demographic is really weird. I have the same amount of demographic in the like 24 to no, 22 to 27-year-old age group, as well as the 40 to 50-year-old age group. So operators are listening to me as well as young bartenders, which I find very, very odd. But I give my advice and stuff that I see coming about. Things that operators should be doing during COVID was a big one. So yeah, the Post Shift podcast is sort of my hospitality podcast that I started. Not really sure why I started. I just wanted to sort of start taking away the perception over the reality, I think, of the hospitality industry. We get romanced a lot, and people looking out, looking in, sort of see a different side of what we are perpetuating, including mental health and all that sort of stuff that I'm a big proponent for. So it was sort of like pulling away the curtain on the Wizard of Oz, and just finding out that the big mask and the floating mists and all that sort of stuff is just an old dude with a bunch of pedals and strings, and sort of pulling back the mask of what the hospitality industry really is, and the vulnerability that we have and the strengths that we have as well. So yeah, it's been a great ride, and being a one-man show, it's been a long learning curve. I think we were talking about it when we first started this, about you looking at like online and squadcast and stuff like that, like learning Zoom and restream and streaming to 4 different platforms, and then stripping audio and then editing audio and all these things has been a great learning curve. But I've come out of it learning more things and becoming a better person the more I talk to more people. And I think as an entrepreneur, as a hospitality person, as all these things, is I think that's my main goal, is that through interviewing people, I'm hoping that more people are becoming better industry people because of it.
Yeah, for sure. Super fascinating on your demographic. I think what that tells you is that, you've got managers who are trying to kind of like get takeaways to tell their staff, and then staff who are motivated enough, the young guns are also just motivated and out there listening to you. So it seems like you've got a pretty interesting demographic. What are some of your favorite rants? Give us one or two of your rants, because I have a couple of episodes that I have labeled as rants. Every once in a while I will do one. So I want to hear your favorites.
Well, I think that we're in the same sort of position. We're hospitality entrepreneurs. So there's this one, like we were saying about herding cats when it comes to industry people. And I think one of my favorite ones was definitely stop using busy as an excuse for being lazy. That was a big one that I know probably upset a few people when I posted that one. But when people say they're busy, I'm like, really? You're busy? You're busy? Like, come on. And I've instilled that into a lot of my, like, I call them my kids, the younger bartenders here in town. I think the 5 things, the two great ones that I think really had a good impact were the 5 things every operator should be doing during COVID, and 5 things every industry person should be doing during COVID. Really just, I think we're taking this opportunity to reset the industry to a degree, and we really should be coming out of it better than we went in, from the macro and the micro. So those have been a lot of fun. And also I do a lot of mental health and how I deal with things, because I think when you get to a certain level in the industry, there's a certain, not a stigma, but a certain perception of yourself being a strong, independent, to crush through walls and to beat anything. And there's times when there's something that just takes the wind out of your sails and guts you. And I like to talk about that a lot and try and be as transparent with that as much as I can, about negative comments or negativity in general, or just being down during COVID. It's Mental Health Awareness Month this month, so I'm going to do something today or tomorrow about that. And just show that the younger bartenders who look up to people like myself and aspire to this have to understand that it's taken me 10, 11, 12 years, almost 22 years of my career, but 10 years here in Canada, working 100 hours a week and sacrificing a hell of a lot to get to this point, when they want it to happen in 18 months. And I'm like, like, that's not the way it works, champ.
Yeah, you see a sexy celebrity chef on the Food Network, and you think it's easy, but it's certainly not the way it ends up working out. But so yeah, of course, for those listening, we're going to link to Shawn's podcast, as well as maybe a couple of those episodes that we just dropped over on the show notes page at modernbarcart.com/podcast. So when the show notes page for this episode goes live, you can go ahead and just head right over to your favorite podcast app and check those out. Shawn, is there anything else you want to talk about before we jump into some lightning round questions here?
To be honest, I think we could probably talk for another 2 hours between ourselves on talking about entrepreneurship and putting yourself out there. I did a really good, strong audit on your social media and your website before I came on. So I can see where you've come from and what you're trying to achieve. And it's aspiring to sort of see that. So I think we could probably talk about how hospitality entrepreneurship and that sort of thing affects people. But I'm ready for the lightning round.
All right, let's do it. We can always maybe we can do a panel at Tails at some point when the industry's back on tap. We can do a panel and maybe dig a little deeper there. But so the first question in our legendary lightning round is, and I'm sure this is going to be difficult for a bartender. What is your favorite cocktail of all time? And if you don't have a favorite, what's something you've been more obsessed with recently?
It's a toss. It's a very close round between a Negroni and a Gimlet. That's mainly because at home I'm a lazy bartender. I don't. I always say that bartending is like being a baseball player. You leave it all out on the pitch, and if you come home after a long shift, you shouldn't be making yourself cocktails because you should be so exhausted mentally and physically that you just want to pour yourself a whiskey and a beer. But Negroni and Gimlet, you can make in bigger batches. So come home, you do 2 ounces or 1.5 ounces of each gin, sweet vermouth, Campari in a pint glass, stir it with your finger, chuck an orange slice in there. You can sit on the couch for an hour and a half and watch TV and unwind. The same thing with the Gimlet. And we're lucky enough here in BC. We have 80 distilleries in BC. And I do a lot of work with BC distilleries, as you can see from my hat. So we have something like 200 and something gins in BC. And we also have a really good cordial maker who makes an epic lime cordial. So like a really nice lime cordial. So it's just like 2 to 1, pint glass, stir it, sit on the couch. So I'm a really lazy bartender when it comes like that.
Oh, I'm a super lazy bartender at home as well. Who makes that lime cordial? We should not be shy to compliment.
It's called Frostbite Syrup Company. It's based here in BC, and yeah, like I can go ghetto with the Old Roses lime cordial as well, but their lime cordial is kind of spectacular.
Yeah, that's a fascinating story of how the lime cordial actually evolved over time, and but that's a story for another episode. Wow. Yeah, I've had the chance to meet a few distillers and a few folks who are in the beverage space in British Columbia, and between the Okanagan wine space and just everything that's going on there, it seems like you really do have a bounty of riches when it comes to materials that you can work with. So you know what? I think at least if you're starting with really high quality stuff, I think it's okay after a long night to make yourself the lazy Gimlet or the lazy Negroni.
100%.
All right. Next question. If you were a cocktail ingredient, what would you be and why?
Amaro. Always Amaro. And I know that's really hipster bartender thing to say these days, but I've always been a massive fan of Fernet Branca and Amepicon and just Amaros in general, and really you start getting down to the regionality of really specific Amaros to villages and regions and homemade stuff made by grandpa in this village. It just opens up this myriad of flavor profiles and pairing with food and all this sort of stuff. So Amaro always.
Nice. Yeah, we have a great Amaro company here in Washington, D.C. called Don Ciccio I Figli, and Francesco, who runs it, actually, the recipes that he uses are from his grandfather, who actually ran stills on the Amalfi Coast and made this stuff.
Amazing.
It's incredible. It's incredible. So if you ever visit D.C., we've got a very, very strong Amaro scene here as well. Great love for this stuff. And you know what? I'm a big Amaro fan as well. But the Fernet Flip is perhaps my favorite egg cocktail. You just can't beat the way that the mint and the Fernet kind of transforms when it meets the fat from the egg yolk. It's just like this crazy way to if you know Fernet, you don't know it until you've had it in a Fernet Flip. Is kind of the way that I think about it. All right, here's the Widowmaker question. If you could have a cocktail with anybody in the world, past or present, who would it be? Where would you go? What would you drink? Just kind of paint us a picture. And you can't say Philip Duff.
This one, when I read this one, this was one that I was just like, this is kind of crazy. This one it is the Widowmaker. It's really difficult because you say the wrong person. I really try to think this one through, and you know what? It's going to sound corny as hell, but my wife and I don't share my industry as much as I do, and taking my wife to like the Savoy in London for the first time, and having a martini by the guys there that would be sort of my ultimate date, because my wife and I have been together for 13 years, but she's more always been the way of accepting me, but never understanding me. And so doing more drink related and food related things with my wife and taking her on the crawls that I go on to the places of people that I know is something that we're trying to do for the next 2 years, much more than we have in the past.
I love that. That's such a good project to have as, as a couple, because, obviously when one person is the creative, I'm speaking from myself here. I know, with my wife and I, I'm sort of the creative, I'm doing entrepreneurial things, and she is the one who kind of keeps everything together and keeps, makes sure that things are functional and that I have the opportunity to do this stuff. And so it's, we've been trying as well, especially since the quarantine, to try, since we're both at home now, to try and like do some creative things around cocktails so that we can both, kind of enjoy them in a way that maybe we didn't have the time to previous to this. So I definitely, that's a really nice thing. And who can do better than a martini at the Savoy? I mean,
exactly.
That's the Mount Olympus of martinis right there. So, getting into some of the wrap-up questions here, what's a common, or you actually might be one of the most difficult people for this, but is also, are there any traditional or common cocktail ingredients that you have never tasted, and why?
This one's a tough one because out of all my travels, like you go to BCB in Berlin and that's just a massive show of everything. But the one ingredient, I did think this one through a lot. I haven't tried any solid Batavia or Rux. That's the one that I don't get enough experience with. And I think I may have only tasted one in my whole entire career. It's just something we don't have here in BC. Even in the US, it's not exactly the easiest ingredient in the world to get. But Batavia Iraq is the one that I'd like to delve into more and do like a solid 6 to 10 tasting spread to really understand the nuances of what it should taste like. 10 years ago, cachaça was 2-3 SKUs on the market, and then you started tasting good cachaça, and you're like, oh, okay. There's the nuances between the brands and the regions, and this is how it should taste. Usually the one example that you get in your market is usually not the best quality. It's usually the cheapest or the easiest to sell. And so a Batavia Iraq is the one that I'd like to delve more into. Yeah.
Well, that sounds like a tail seminar right there. That's a tasting seminar if I've ever heard of one. Fascinating ingredient. Obviously, it's, the cornerstone of a rock punch. Anybody who's interested in learning more about it, you should pick up David Wondrich's Punch and read a little bit more about it. But yeah, fascinating ingredient. And you're right. Here in North America, it's just not very widely available. So really cool answer. What's an unusual or controversial view or belief that you hold in the spirits and cocktail world? And I have a feeling this might not be as difficult to answer.
There's no right way to make a cocktail, but there's plenty of wrong ways.
Ooh.
People really get hung up on the Wondrich way or the Groff way or the Reagan way. Whereas if you really research Reagan and de Groff and stuff like that, they even changed their styles of making drinks over the last 20 years. You read their first books compared to now, it's because the industry has changed. We've learnt new things, like Dave Arnold has brought out amazing dilution charts and all these sort of things, and our ice has changed. Our ice was really good back in the day. It was hand chipped off a block, and then it turned into average hotel pan ice, and then now we've got cold draft. And so that's usually the thing, is there's no right way to make a cocktail, but there's plenty of wrong ways. And for me, leading teams and training, it's sort of a very democratic way of doing things, because different regions have different recipes. Like the old fashioned in Wisconsin is very different to the old fashioned in New York. Those sort of changes. So they're not wrong. They're just different. And so whenever I take over a new bar or open up a new place, I get the team together. We bring out all the ingredients for classic cocktails, and we put out a recipe on the table, and we're like, this is the recipe for the sidecar. And then if anybody's got a different recipe, we make them all, we taste them all, we choose which one's the best. That's the new spec. So that's probably the most controversial one. I get in a lot of trouble for that one sometimes because people go, but, and they try and quote someone or quote an article. But I just don't think there's a right way to make cocktails. There's just plenty of wrong ways.
Yeah. It's funny. I used to teach poetry at the university level, and my first lecture after I'd figured out how to teach for a couple semesters, my first intro lecture was always why I'm allowed to grade your poems. And it's not because there's a right way and a wrong way to write a poem. It's just that you need to do the work in order for it to be a good product. And in doing the work, you discover all the wrong ways, and therefore are able to eliminate all the wrong or bad or clunky things about the poem. And so if you do the work, then your end product it doesn't matter what that end product looks like per se. It doesn't have to look like any one given thing. But one thing I can tell is somebody who's actually done the work versus somebody who hasn't done the work. And it's an inherently better product when you've done the work, when you've sat there with the London version of the sidecar and the Paris version of the sidecar and the half and half, halfway in between the London and Paris version of the sidecar. You get your perfect sidecar by doing that work, so that does really resonate with me. And I think personally, I'm not going to be one of those people who gives you any hard time for taking that approach, because it is thorough, right?
It is.
Yeah. Well, Shawn, this has been awesome. I've had a great time hanging out with you here. Can you share with my listeners probably like 3 big key pieces of information here? The best way to contact you digitally in the social media space or via website, the best way to find your books, and then also where to find your podcast.
So on Instagram, probably the best one is just at Shawn Soole on Instagram. Very easy, ShawnSoole. My website is SooleHospitality.com. And so you can just go to that as well. And all my podcasts are up on my website as well in the little links up there. But I'm available on all the platforms, I think 12 or 13 different platforms. So if you just type in Post Shift Podcasts, you'll find it somewhere. So those were the three big ones to be able to find me on.
Right. And Amazon, obviously, for books. Anywhere else you'd like to plug?
Amazon, and if you're listening, I think Indigo in Canada has got a fair few floating around as well. The US, obviously, with this we got distribution, I think, 2 weeks before COVID, so warehouses weren't shipping out to bookstores to start. So Amazon is probably the best website to be hitting up to get the book.
Right. So for all you listening at home, please seek out Great Northern Cocktails. Use it as both a recipe guide for inspiration for the projects that you're inevitably doing at home while we're all stuck here while we try and wait out this pandemic. And then also you can certainly use that as a reference guide to figure out where to visit when you next travel to Canada and need a good cocktail. So Shawn, again, thanks so much for being on the podcast, and it was a pleasure. Yeah, pleasure having you on.
Yeah, it was an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much, sir. Thanks for listening, Pose Shifters. I hope you enjoyed that episode. I really enjoy sitting down with friends and peers and just chatting about the industry and getting down to the nuts and bolts of what's really going on out there. Make sure you like, subscribe, comment, everything on all the platforms. Just hit it up and I'll do my best to answer any queries or questions you have. I'll see you next week, guys. Bye.